The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the small, tranquil farming town of Willow Creek. Dust motes danced in the warm air, and the serene sound of chirping crickets filled the silence. But just beyond the edge of the crops, chaos loomed. A handful of young men, rough around the edges and hungry for a thrill, circled around a rusty pickup truck parked under the skeletal remains of an old barn. They were known as the Black Hawks, a gang that thrived on fear, disarray, and power. This wasn't just any ordinary day in Willow Creek. The Black Hawks had their sights set on something ambitious, a farmer named Tom Aldridge. He was a man of simple pleasures, with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands. He'd spent years nurturing his land, and rumors began to swirl that he had struck gold, quite literally. Word had it that Tom had discovered a hidden vein of valuable minerals lying deep within his property. The gang, fueled by restless energy and the belief that everything belonged to the bold, decided today would be the day they would scare him off his land. A twisted kind of bravado drove them. They reveled in the idea of making an example out of Tom, an old man clinging to outdated notions of hard work and personal pride. As Tom made his way back from the fields, wiping the sweat from his brow, he noticed the silhouette of the truck parked ominously near his home. The sound of raucous laughter floated through the air. He felt a twinge of unease, something cold gnawing at the edges of his mind, but he shook it off. He was no stranger to trouble, and even at 60, he wasn't about to yield his land to anyone. The sun dipped lower, painting the walls of his barn in hues of orange and crimson. Yet his instincts prickled. Something was off. He took a breath, the earthy scent of hay enveloping him, grounding him. A short time later, Tom heard footsteps approaching, heavy and deliberate. The gang emerged from the shadows, their confidence brimming, faces smug and reckless. At their helm stood a tall figure named Blake, an imposing presence with a gleam of malevolence in his eyes. Blake called, the false jocularity in his voice cutting through the evening air. "Heard you've been striking it rich." Tom stepped into the light, resolute. "I'm busy." The laughter from the gang ricocheted off the barn walls. They had expected a quivering reaction, fear perhaps, but they found something entirely different in Tom's eyes. It was a calmness, a grounding assertion of self-worth that startled them. Blake waved his hand dismissively. "Ain't nobody asked you what you wanted, old man." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You've got something we want. Share it, or things might get." The air thickened with tension. Tom could feel the adrenaline pulsing through his veins, but he wasn't one to back down. He thought of his father, a stoic man who taught him to stand tall against intimidation. Tom echoed, his voice steady like the oak trees lining his property. Surprise flickered across the gang's faces, and for a brief moment their confidence wavered. But Blake shook it off, fueled by reckless bravado. He leaned in closer, pushing Tom to the precipice of fear. "Do you really think you can stand against us? You're just a washed-up farmer. We're the Black Hawks." Tom took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't just a farmer. He was the keeper of his legacy, tied to the soil he worked, the history that ran deep in his land. "Let me make this clear, Blake. You're not welcomed here." He turned from the group, feeling the sun dipping lower, illuminating a path toward the barn. The gang's laughter faded, replaced by murmurs of disbelief. But Blake, unable to mask his fury, made a quick decision. "This isn't over, Aldridge." Night fell, draping the farm in darkness, but inside his home, Tom felt a ripple of defiance coursing through him. Fear was a potent adversary, but so was courage. He didn't know what the gang was capable of. They'd woven tales of violence and greed around town like spider webs, but he wouldn't let their shadows darken his door. Just as he sat down to eat his dinner, a loud bang echoed from outside. Heart racing, Tom bolted to the window. The gang had returned, but this time they weren't alone. They had brought along torches, flames flickering wildly, casting long shadows. They were here to make a statement, to let him know what awaited him if he didn't relent. Tom steadied himself, heart pounding in his chest. He could call the police, but what would that solve? Fear was contagious, and he wasn't about to let it seep into his bones. He opened the door, stepping out into the night. The flames illuminated his weathered face, revealing a steely gaze. "You think these flames scare me?" Blake stepped forward with a flash of irritation. "You're a stubborn old fool, Aldridge." The group surged forward, but Tom stood his ground. Thoughts raced in his mind, memories of his father teaching him to face the winds in life kept him still. He shouted, voice rising above the crackling flames. "What do you think you're accomplishing? You're nothing but children playing at war." And then, in an unexpected surge of adrenaline, he charged forward. The gang paused, taken aback, not expecting the farmer to stand so boldly. "Come on, Blake." Tom's fearlessness held a mirror up to the gang, revealing their own uncertainties. For a brief moment they hesitated. In that heartbeat they realized that this farmer wasn't the easy target they had hoped for. Blake, sensing the energy shift, clenched his fists, stepping back just enough to regroup. He muttered, uncertainty creeping into his voice. But before they could decide their next move, a low growl echoed from the darkened fields. A pack of Tom's dogs emerged from the shadows, their protective instincts awakened. They barked fiercely, muscles tensed as they surrounded Tom, ready to guard their territory. Seeing the dogs, the gang's bravado dissolved into nervous laughter, now laced with real fear. Blake shouted, suddenly feeling the weight of his bravado crumble. And just like that, the Black Hawks turned tail, sprinting away from the scene they had crafted. Distant echoes of their laughter lingered but were soon swallowed by the night, leaving only silence and the steady rhythm of Tom's breath. Tom watched them go, heart thrumming, feeling an overwhelming wave of relief wash over him. He had faced the storm and emerged unscathed, and in that moment a profound truth settled in his bones. He turned to his dogs, knelt to stroke their fur, feeling their warmth against the cool night air. "Good job, team," he spoke softly. As the night deepened, the stars blinked into life above them, twinkling like the treasures buried deep in his land. Tom gazed upwards, finding a sense of serenity amidst the turmoil. He knew this wouldn't be the last of the Black Hawks, but he had sent a message. Courage can daunt even the most powerful of threats, and legacy isn't just about land, it's about standing firm in the face of adversity. Days turned into weeks, and while the threat of the Black Hawks loomed sporadically, they learned to tread lightly around Tom. Every time they passed by, they'd steer clear of his property, the memory of his unwavering stand rendering them hesitant. Tom didn't just cultivate crops. He cultivated strength, hope, and the unyielding knowledge that fear can only control those willing to submit. For every moment they came to stir trouble, he was ready, not just with the strength of his dogs or the earth that surrounded him, but fortified with a spirit that stood unshaken. His resilience rippled through the town of Willow Creek, reminding those who lived there that sometimes the fiercest battles are fought not with force, but with an unwavering heart. As autumn approached, orange and red leaves painted the landscape, and Tom continued to work his land. With every seed he sowed, he fostered a deeper connection with himself and his land, broadening the roots of his legacy, ensuring that fear would never dictate his journey again. The Black Hawks learned that night that true power isn't taken, it's earned through courage, resolve, and the unyielding belief in oneself. And with that, Tom Aldridge became a legend, a symbol of defiance and strength that would resonate through the heart of Willow Creek for generations to come. A gust of wind swept through Willow Creek that crisp autumn evening, rustling leaves and stirring up dust from the gravel road. A sense of unease hung in the air, thick and heavy like an approaching storm. In the golden hue of the setting sun, shadows stretched longer across the fields. Out on the edge of town, a seasoned farmer named Sam Jenkins wiped his brow, glancing towards the horizon. He toiled all day, but he had a nagging feeling something was amiss. Just beyond the fields, a group of young men loitered near the old barn, the Black Hawks, they called themselves. A gang known for their bullying tactics and wild antics, they thrived on chaos, seeking to instill fear wherever they roamed. It was whispered that they had been feeding on the uncertainty of the townsfolk, and now they had their sights set squarely on Sam. As night began to drape its cloak over the land, the gang descended towards Sam's property, their laughter echoing through the chill of the air. They thought they were just a bunch of kids kicking up trouble, yet they were playing with fire. Sam, with his deep-set wrinkles and hands hardened from years of labor, wasn't the kind of man to easily back down. As they approached, he stood tall, arms crossed, bracing himself for whatever storm was about to hit. "Look who we have here, the old man with his precious corn," Blake, the gang's leader, shouted, swaggering forward. He had a reputation for being tough, but there was a dangerous glint in his eyes that betrayed his bravado. "Heard there's gold in those fields." Sam straightened, his voice steady and unwavering. "You boys should turn around." Blake chuckled, a low, mocking sound that carried through the night. "Mistake." "Nah, old man. The mistake was thinking you could keep that land all to yourself." The fearlessness emanating from Sam was palpable, causing a pause in the gang's forward momentum. He wasn't a target. He was a man prepared to defend everything he had built. Sam took a step forward, driven by years of dedication to his land and pride stitched deeply within his being. "You want what I have, you'll have to come take it." The surprise on Blake's face shifted to anger as he surveyed his gang. They were used to expecting fear, not defiance. Fear often fuels impulse, causing people to act out of instinct, and in that moment the gang felt the weight of their own hesitations. Blake spat back, moving closer, an edge of desperation creeping into his bravado. "You think you can scare us off with your old stories of hard work and perseverance." But Sam held his ground, unyielding. "And yet here I stand. You think you know fear? Try standing in a field for hours, working the earth with your own hands. Try to sow the seeds of your future and watch them blossom." Laughter erupted from the gang, but it was tinged with uncertainty. They had expected Sam to quake, to run, to hide behind the walls he had built. Instead, he faced them with the calm resolve of a man who had seen every storm in life yet stood firm. As they closed in, tension electrified the air between them. Blake's gang began to pressure their leader. "Let's just smash something, Blake. Show him we mean business," one of them suggested, but Sam interrupted before they could move. His voice was low, but it resonated with strength. "My father built this farm, and I'll fight for it till my last breath. You think you're tough?" Suddenly, Blake lunged forward, but Sam didn't flinch. In one swift motion, he pulled out a baseball bat from behind the barn door, dusty but sturdy, a tool not just for playing games but for defending his life's work. The gang paused, their bravado faltering as they realized Sam wasn't bluffing. "Stay back," Sam warned, standing firm, bat resting ominously against his shoulder. He breathed deep, finding the resolve he had learned from his father. Just then a sharp howl rang out across the fields, the sound of Sam's loyal dog, Duke, emerging from the shadows. The massive hound bounded to Sam's side, sensing the tension, growling low and protective. The gang's laughter evaporated, replaced by uncertain glances among themselves. "Is that your best weapon?" Blake sneered, though his bravado was fading fast. Sam smirked. "That dog once chased off a bear." At that moment the gang felt the pendulum shift. The harshness of the night seemed to lean in Sam's favor. They were looking for an easy target, a laugh, and instead found themselves standing before a man and his faithful companion, both resolute in their defense. The gang began to back away slowly, the fight leaving their postures, but Blake wasn't having it. He gritted his teeth, unwilling to let go of his pride. "We're not done here," he growled, but the uncertainty in his eyes spoke differently. The evening air hung thick with tension, but Sam just raised his bat slightly, waiting. In that silence he found power, not just within himself but in the belief that he was not alone. Loyalty ran deep. He had cultivated more than just crops on his land. Blake, once the embodiment of cockiness, now felt the weight of his choices. This wasn't just a game. They were standing on hallowed ground, the soil rich with years of labor and legacy. After a long pause and with a huff, Blake turned to his gang. "Let's get out of here." His words deflated the air, and one by one, the gang followed, retreating, the echoes of their earlier bravado fading into the distance. Sam stood tall, heart pounding, but a smile creeping onto his face. Duke nudged against his leg, sensing the victory, the calm warmth returning to their little corner of the world. As darkness embraced the land, Sam took a moment to breathe, the energy shifting back, the night finally quieting around him. He double-checked his barn, feeling the weight of the bat as he set it back down. Defiance was a shield, and tonight he had worn it well. Days turned into nights, and while whispers of the incident lingered around town, Sam continued to work the fields. Word of his steadfastness spread like wildfire, fueling the spirit of Willow Creek. People began to rally behind him, eager to lift his burden, determined not to let fear rule their lives. On one particularly cool evening, Sam gathered with friends at the local diner. They sat over mugs of steaming coffee, laughter filling the air. Their conversations danced around the events of the past week, and Sam felt a swell of pride. Their courage echoed through their shared stories, igniting hope among the townsfolk. "You know, Sam," a neighbor said, "you've inspired us all. You stood your ground when they thought they could scare you off." Sam leaned back, feeling the warmth of camaraderie. "They've only got power if we give it to them." Word reached the Black Hawks about the town's new resolve. They were no longer just a band of rebellious kids. They were the underdogs now, facing an entire community that had rallied behind a farmer. They became outsiders, their reputation tarnished by their failed attempt to intimidate. As Sam worked the fields day by day, he felt the strength of unity growing around him, a force that wouldn't easily waver. One afternoon, he spotted Blake linger nearby, leaning against the old fence. The sight of him ignited a surge of emotions. Sam's heart raced. Was this a sign of trouble or true change in the gang? Blake's eyes, once sharp and menacing, now carried a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even remorse. "Hey, Sam," Blake called out hesitantly. Sam paused, unsure of what to expect. But he stepped closer, curiosity outweighing his apprehension. Blake shifted, glancing at the ground. "Listen, things got out of hand. I don't really want this life, you know." The weight of Blake's words carried a gravity that struck deep within Sam. Strength is not in the fear you project, it's in how you stand up for others. "I want to change," Blake admitted, the bravado in his voice cracking slightly. "The willingness to change is a powerful thing." Sam contemplated, feeling empathy for a young man lost in a cycle he hadn't chosen entirely for himself. You find a way to make amends, help build what you tried to tear down. As the sun dipped behind the hills, casting a warm glow over the land, Blake nodded slowly. "I want to try." The two men stood facing one another, different journeys converging under the endless sky. The conversation was not just about power or intimidation. It was about understanding, growth, and the strength found in unity. "I'll give you a chance, Blake," Sam said finally, voice steady and strong. "The past doesn't define you if you choose to change, but don't expect quick forgiveness." That night, Sam turned to his fields feeling renewed, a sense of hope rekindled. The battle wasn't just about resisting fears, it was about transforming it, both for himself and for those who had lost their way. Time moved on, and in Willow Creek, stories around bonfires reflected the strength found in vulnerability communities growing from defiant seeds that refused to be buried. As seasons changed, the gang that once sought to instill fear slowly turned their lives around, redefining their identities. They learned that real power lay not in the chaos they once reveled in, but within the bonds they forged through respect and understanding. And so, in that small farming town, under the vast canvas of stars, Sam Jenkins not only stood as a guardian of his land but also as a beacon of change. Together, they learned that sometimes the greatest battles are not physical but fought in our hearts, shaping the path toward a future where hope triumphs over fear. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, as an uneasy tension hung over the quiet farming community of Maplewood. In the fields off Maple Road, a solitary figure bent low to the ground, tending to his crops. This was Harold Mitchell, a farmer known for his rugged hands, sun-weathered skin, and relentless dedication to his land. The late summer harvest was approaching, but tonight, shadows lurked just beyond the edge of his property. A group of young men known as the Iron Wolves had decided that they would show Harold what fear really looked like. This gang of troublemakers had a reputation for being reckless, their laughter often echoing after nightfall like a sinister melody. They fed off the thrill of intimidation, and tonight, their sights were set right on Harold's patch of earth. As Harold stood, wiping sweat from his brow, he caught a glimpse of their figures prowling near the barn, a cluster of bravado wrapped in leather jackets. They moved like wolves closing in on prey, emboldened by the knowledge that their target was a solitary farmer, isolated and assumed weak. "Look at him, still working like nothing's going on," Blake, the leader of the Iron Wolves, called out, approaching with an air of arrogance. "What's the old man gonna do?" At first, Harold didn't respond. He straightened, locking eyes with the gang. An undercurrent of dangerous energy buzzed in the air, but he refused to show any sign of weakness. He stood tall against the twilight sky, a figure of resilience shaped by years of battling the elements, not just in nature but against society's prejudices as well. "Boys, I need you to back off," Harold said finally, his voice calm but deep, resonating with authority. Blake's laughter rang out like thunder. "You think you can scare us off with some harsh words? What are you gonna do? Call the cops?" The gang's bravado was intoxicating for them, a sense of power they wielded over a target they deemed helpless. The monster they had imagined Harold to be was nowhere to be found, replaced by a man whose strength lay in his conviction. "You need to understand something," Harold continued, stepping forward, his eyes narrowing. "This land means something. You think scaring me is going to impress anyone?" The gang shared skeptical glances, unsure how to respond to the grounded resilience echoing from this aging farmer. They had come seeking laughter and an easy victory, but all they found was a man who wouldn't back down. Blake, seeking to reclaim control, stepped closer, invading Harold's personal space. "You really think you're tough?" He leaned in, his tone shifting to one filled with menace. The flicker of nerves danced in the air, but Harold didn't flinch. Instead, he squared his shoulders, feeling the weight of generations resting on him. He thought of his father, who had taught him to stand firm, to fight for what was rightfully his. "Do your worst," Harold said, his voice steady as granite, peaceful yet fierce. In that moment something shifted. A ripple of doubt coursed through the gang. They weren't prepared for a fight, not a real one. Just then the first challenge twisted down the path of their intentions. "Fine," Blake growled, his bravado faltering. "If you want a fight, we'll give you one." As Blake retreated, the gang exchanged glances filled with uncertainty. Outside of their fiery bravado, their threats now seemed hollow. They were not in control, they were consumed by a fear of their own making. "And don't forget," Harold called after them, his voice echoing into the night. Harold turned back towards the barn, heart racing but pride swelling in his chest. He was no hero, but he was a man defending everything he loved, his land, his way of life. In this moment, he didn't just stand against fear, he became a force of courage. He grabbed a sturdy pitchfork and hoisted it over his shoulder, a reminder to himself of the strength coursing through his veins. This was not just about physical power, it was about standing firm against the tide of intimidation. Nightfall cloaked Maplewood in darkness, but Harold worked late into the evening. He knew Florida's summers could stifle a man's bravery, yet somehow, the weight of adrenaline kept him on path. Fear is a powerful motivator, but so was resolve. The Iron Wolves were not done. The next day they made their plans cunning and twisted. They aimed not to confront Harold again, but to undermine his will. They sabotaged his equipment, slashed tires, and messed with his crops, all in an attempt to drench him in despair. When Harold discovered the damage, he felt the sting of betrayal wash over him. The crops he had cultivated were trampled, and his tractor lay malfunctioning with its tire punctured. Anger coursed through him like wildfire, but he also felt an overwhelming sense of loss for the trust he placed in his community. In times of crisis, people can offer help or deepen wounds. He reached for his phone, debating whether to call the police or to confront the gang head-on. But deep inside, he felt an instinctual pull to stand strong against the cruelty and face them as he would any storm. As the sun rose high, casting long shadows across the field, Harold strode back toward his farm, gripping a shovel in one hand. The Iron Wolves didn't expect him to confront them. They thought their actions had broken him. "What's wrong, old man?" Blake shouted, trying to mask his own nervousness. The gang had clustered outside the barn, their laughter mingling uneasily with the warm breeze. "Not at all," Harold responded, fire igniting in his chest. With that, he strode right into their midst, shovel resting against his shoulder, a symbol of labor and determination. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, voice resonating with strength. "Do you think tearing me down makes you better? You should know bullying is the coward's weapon." Blake stepped forward, glaring at Harold. "Coward." Harold met his gaze, unyielding. "You think being tough is about intimidation. Real strength is in courage, standing for what you believe, despite the odds." The gang's laughter faltered, replaced now with an unsettling silence. They had come to terrorize and instead found an unexpected force willing to stand against their aggression. In that silence, Harold's words settled heavily, pulling at threads of doubt in Blake's bravado. The gang's confidence crumbled, revealing cracks in their facade, the very doubts none had dared to voice out loud. One of the gang members mumbled, uncertainty washing over him. "Laughter doesn't drown out the cold truth," Harold continued, eyes gleaming with passion. As the gang stood in an uncertain circle, fear began to gnaw at their bravado. Blake shifted, irritation reflecting in his posture, though inside, he wrestled with the reality of Harold's words. "Maybe you're right," Blake conceded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then face the truth," Harold shot back, conviction resonating from his heart. "You're not powerful." For the first time, something shifted in Blake. No longer was he surrounded by laughter and bravado. Instead, he found himself in the middle of a moment where truth pierced his defenses. "The only thing that makes us stronger is unity," Harold pressed on. The palpable tension hung in the air, each member of the gang weighing the weight of their leader's response. They had sought fear and dominance, yet they were faced with a man shining with the kind of strength that made them question their own choices. Blake finally stepped back, shaking his head slowly. "You think you can change us? It's not that easy," he said, though doubt creased the corners of his brow. "But it starts with a choice," Harold replied. "Winning doesn't have to mean tearing someone down." For an instant, hope flickered across the gang's faces, uncertainty mingling with curiosity. The demeanor of the Iron Wolves began to shift, a convergence of perceptions surging among them. As days wore on, the weather shifted, ushering in the first hints of autumn. While the Iron Wolves had once been a symbol of chaos, the weight of Harold's courage started to lodge itself in their hearts. They began stepping back from the shadows they had hidden behind, now questioning their own motives. Harold, with each sunrise, continued to cultivate his land, but something began to blossom among the town folks too, a sense of unity. Neighbors came together to support Harold after each act of sabotage, and whispers of community echoed stronger than ever before. "We're in this together," they would say, lending hands to repair the damage. Harold's rows of crops flourished under the power of this newfound resilience. The Iron Wolves were slowly morphing, each member confronted by the loud echo of their own fears. They hadn't anticipated the challenge of overcoming themselves, a reality that proved far more daunting than intimidating Harold. The turning point arrived one windy evening as the sun wept over the horizon. Blake, no longer hiding behind bravado, approached Harold, this time without his gang. He stepped forward cautiously, hands in his pockets, words tumbling out of his mouth with a nervous humility. He asked, a newfound sincerity forever etched on his features. "Of course, Blake," Harold replied, motioning for him to sit. A contrast to their previous encounters, this meeting felt like the first step towards something unexpectedly beautiful. "I know I made a lot of mistakes," Blake began, fidgeting with the hem of his jacket. "I never really thought about what it meant to be afraid, or how to fight it." Harold nodded, sensing the raw truth behind Blake's admission. A realization flashed in Blake's eyes. "I want to change. I want to be a part of this community, not just lurking in the shadows, trying to act tough." His voice drifted off, exposing a fragile honesty beneath the remnants of pride. With a warm smile, Harold leaned in. "You've taken the first step by being honest. Now let's work together. And while you're at it, help those boys realize that the gang mentality doesn't define who you are." And just like that, a bridge was formed. Blake shared Harold's words with the remaining members of the Iron Wolves, and one by one they began showing up, reluctantly offering to help. Each time they turned up to lend a hand, Harold welcomed them without judgment, slowly tearing down the walls of animosity they had built. Together, they fixed fences, repaired equipment, and began working the fields. As the weeks passed, the lines between them blurred. Laughter echoed around the farm, a difference from the chaos that had once ruled the Iron Wolves. As the final harvest approached, something remarkable transformed among the gang. They were no longer just a group of boys seeking terror. They became friends, allies, and newfound supporters. Their strength became rooted in the soil they once scorned, forging a bond built on shared labor and respect. And just like Harold had promised, they learned one fundamental truth, that real power lies in standing together, lifting each other rather than tearing each other down. As autumn painted the landscape in vibrant hues, the community of Maplewood stood transformed, not just by the unwavering heart of a farmer, but by the courage found when fear is met with understanding. In a world often filled with chaos, it was here, among the golden fields, that courage became the most genuine mark of strength. The hum of the harvest filled the air, a rhythm of resilience, unity, and a promise that fear could never again reside in the hearts of those who choose to embrace their true selves. The sunset painted the sky in fiery oranges and purples over the sleepy farming town of Cedar Grove, but an ominous chill lingered in the air. Down a quiet dirt road, in a creaky wooden farmhouse surrounded by sprawling fields of corn, stood Joe Whittaker, a farmer with weathered hands and a spirit fortified by years of toil. Little did he know, tonight would bring a storm of a different kind, a clash of wills that would change the fabric of his life. In the shadows lurking just past the edge of his property, a gang known as the Iron Serpents gathered. They were notorious for their reckless antics, fed by adrenaline and a thirst for power. Heavy boots thudded against the earth as they plodded, their laughter echoed by the rustling corn. They were out to make an example of Joe, a quiet, hard-working farmer living under the false security of unbothered days. "Look at him, oblivious to the real world," Blake, the gang leader, sneered, his dark eyes glinting with malice. The gang circled like predators, grappling with the thrill of a looming confrontation. Joe had earned their disdain by being diligent, by refusing to bend to the chaos they thrived on. Little did they know, Joe wasn't the kind of man to be cowed by some misguided bravado. As twilight descended, Joe sensed something was off. There was an unsettling sound, a disturbance rustling in the wind. He set down his tools and stepped outside, squinting into the fading light. The whisper of danger stalked through the fields like a dark shape creeping closer. Blake shouted from the edges of the property, a faux-friendly smile plastered on his face. "Get off my land, boys," Joe called back, standing tall, arms crossed over his chest. He didn't flinch in his resolve. Blake stepped forward, flanked by his crew who wore defiance like a badge. "What are you gonna do about it, old man? Call the cops." "The cops won't need to come," Joe replied, his voice steady as a rock. The gang erupted in laughter, but there was a hint of uncertainty in the sound. They were built on intimidation, and here was Joe, defiant, unyielding, a bastion against the tide of chaos. "Why would we do that?" Blake's bravado spilled over as he glanced at his friends. Joe took a step forward, the air thickening between them. "This state of delusion won't last long, Blake. You're playing with fire here." The seriousness in his tone hit the gang like an unexpected gust of wind. In that moment they saw not an old farmer but a man standing firm, a wall of resilience unwilling to back down. "Let's see how tough you really are," Blake said, a sneer creeping back onto his face, masking the vulnerability within. In a single instant the gang surged forward, their numbers filling the darkening space. Joe gripped a nearby pitchfork, its wooden shaft familiar and comforting. He stood his ground, ready to defend what was his, anchored not just by tools but by generations of farmers who had come before him. Just then, a sharp bark broke through the tension as Max, Joe's loyal dog, raced to his side, snatching at the air like a coiled spring ready to unleash. The sight of the fierce dog shifted the balance of power, causing the gang to halt. "Well, that's a big dog," one of them muttered, fear registering for the first time on their faces. "It'll be a lot worse if you take another step," Joe warned, not looking away from Blake. "What, you think you can take all of us?" Blake's bravado faltered, his voice taut. The gang began to bubble with doubt as the reality seeped in. Facing a fearless old man and a fierce dog, they felt the break of their own bravado. The fear festered like an open wound they didn't know how to treat. The power that had driven them suddenly felt fragile in the face of righteous defiance. After an agonizing beat, Blake retreated, waving a dismissive hand to signal the gang to follow. "This isn't over," he spat, but the fury in his voice carried a nervous edge. And just like that, they disappeared back into the edge of the fields, a fleeting memory against the backdrop of a darkening sky. Joe released the breath he didn't realize he was holding, his heart still thrumming against his chest. At that moment he knew he had stood tall, but the threat wasn't extinguished. As days went by, Joe returned to his routine, but a shadow lingered. The iron serpents hadn't forgotten. They watched from afar, gathering strength, whispering plans in dark corners. The unease in the air coiled tighter with each passing night. Then, one chilly evening, as Joe was preparing to head home after a long day, he found his tractor's sabotage tires slashed, the engine destroyed. Rage and dread clawed at him, tightening around his chest. He didn't call the police. Joe had learned in his years that often the authorities could only respond after the damage was done. Instead, he steeled himself for a confrontation, knowing deep down that fear could only persist if left unchecked. Fueled by determination, Joe began repairing the broken tractor alone, feeling the weight of each bolt and nut he replaced. In every twist of the wrench, he felt the energy shift, a quiet fortitude pulled from the depths of his being. Days passed. The sun rose and set, and Joe tirelessly worked the land despite the gang's antics. He reinforced his fences, solidified his resolve, and refused to succumb to the tides of chaos washing over him. He called on a strength greater than his own, believing that light could cut through darkness any day. One afternoon, as he toiled, he caught sight of Blake lurking near the edge of his property once again, eyes fixed on the fields, assessing the progress Joe had made. It was like a predator out for its next meal. "Looks like you're fixing up well, farmer," Blake called out, a mocking tone carrying over the dust in the air. Joe turned around, heart pounding, but his spirit remained unyielded. "What do you want, Blake?" Blake took a step forward, crossing the invisible line of respect that defined boundaries. "That's just it. We want to show you that you're nobody." "No, Blake," Joe replied, taking a step back. "This land is a legacy. It holds stories and lives, fights and hopes." Joe's words hung in the air like an echo, and for the first time he saw a flicker of confusion cross Blake's face. Perhaps, in his mind, his bravado had been unchallenged for too long. It was time someone stripped away the false bravado he had erected. "Fear doesn't make you tough, it makes you small," Joe continued. Anger surged through Blake, but he hesitated. Joe could see the gears turning, the uncertainty crackled like electricity around them. For the first time, the word small landed. Weeks turned into a drawn-out battle as Blake's presence began to wane. While the iron serpent still lurked in the shadows, they hesitated, choosing to retreat rather than engage. They watched in disbelief as Joe continued to work his fields, mending bridges and relationships. While fear might have been their weapon, resilience became Joe's shield. Each time the gang attempted to intimidate him or sabotage the work he poured his life into, they found themselves bouncing against a wall of stoicism. One crisp evening, as Joe wrapped up another long day, he noticed a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye. Blake stood before him, but this time the bravado was dimmed, replaced by a vulnerable earnestness painted on his face. Blake asked, voice trembling slightly. Joe paused, studying the young man who once aimed to intimidate but now seemed to carry an unspoken weight. I realize I messed up. It was stupid, everything we did," he admitted, shifting uncomfortably. "You didn't break. I thought I could scare you into submission." In that moment of honesty, a bridge built on vulnerability began to emerge between them. Joe's heart softened, allowing hope to filter through the difficult exchange. "It takes courage to admit that," Joe responded, stepping forward. "There's more to strength than power over others." Blake hesitated, taking a deep breath. "How do I make it right?" "Start by helping others," Joe offered, a hesitant smile breaking through. "Use your strength to build instead of tear down." For the first time, Blake nodded, seeing not just an enemy but a man who had refused to be swallowed by despair. The floodgates of change had cracked open, and together they stepped towards healing what had been broken. The iron serpents began to evolve. With Joe's guidance, they found purpose in helping others rather than sabotaging lives. They began to work together, community gardens sprouted, and the farmers of Cedar Grove leaned into collaboration. As the weeks rolled into months, the town began to transform. No longer did whispers of discord echo through the fields. Instead, Laughter filled the air, a symphony of redemption dancing in the breeze. In the end, Joe wasn't just a farmer. He became a symbol, a living legacy of strength, vulnerability, and unity. He transformed chaos into action, proving that fear could only reign if left unchallenged. And as harsh winters gave way to new springs, something beautiful flourished in Cedar Grove, revealing a powerful truth. When faced with darkness, it takes just a flicker of courage to ignite the light within. And in that light, hope could bloom, forever patching the scars left behind from battles fought and won. The moon hung high in the night sky, casting a silver glow over the fields of Maplewood. A gentle rustle of corn echoed the soft whispers of the night, but there was something darker lurking just beyond the edges of those fields. Laughter, ominous and raucous, broke through the tranquility, sending shivers down the spine of anyone who might be listening. In that moment, a storm was brewing, not of weather but of will and defiance. On an isolated patch of land, John Carter, a seasoned farmer with a heart as vast as his fields, stepped out of his weathered barn, wiping the sweat from his brow. The scent of freshly turned earth surrounded him, a symphony of hard work and devotion. But tonight the air felt different, charged with an unsettling energy. A gang known as the Iron Wolves had set their sights on John. They were known for their reckless behavior, their crude intimidation tactics used to establish dominance. They fed on fear, seeking the thrill that came from making others tremble. And tonight, they believed they would strike fear into the heart of a quiet farmer. "Look at him," Blake, the gang's leader, sneered, eyes glinting with mischief. "Just another farmer." The gang had gathered, confidence streaming off them like a thick mist. They reveled in the thought of scare tactics, buzzing with the intoxicating thrill of the hunt. But little did they know, John wasn't just any farmer. He was a man of grit, a man who had tilled this land for decades, weathering storms both literal and metaphorical. As Blake and his gang approached, John stood tall, arms crossed, a steadfast figure against the encroaching darkness. "You boys should turn back," he called out, his voice steady. Blake paused, considering John's unwavering stance. "What are you gonna do about it, old man? Scream for help? Step aside for what?" John's voice was firm, echoing through the still night. Another gang member chimed in, laughing nervously, his bravado slipping. John echoed, his brows furrowing. "Fear only has power if you let it." Laughter erupted amongst the gang, but it rang hollow. The tension in the air thickened, heavy like the oppressive summer heat. For a moment, John's defiance seemed to catch them off guard, as if they were suddenly facing someone who would not easily bend. Blake stepped closer, determination creeping into his tone. "Show us what you've got, old man." John gripped his pitchfork, the texture of the cold metal grounding him. "What I think is that strength isn't in the weapon, it's in the resolve to defend what's right." That struck a chord. Uncertainty flickered in the eyes of the gang members, their laughter faltering. This wasn't the easy target they had presumed. John stood firm, each word like a shield raised against the chaos they sought to impose. "Come on, boys. Don't let him get to you," Blake scoffed, but even his confidence wavered. "Scared or not, it doesn't matter," John replied, voice like steel. "I've faced storms that could shake mountains, and I'm still standing." The gang hesitated, doubt creeping among them. They thought they could overpower a simple farmer, but John was no ordinary man. He embodied years of hard work and countless battles against elements far more dangerous than a group of reckless youths. In the quiet crackle of the night, it became evident that John would not back down. He took a step closer, the moonlight glinting off the prongs of the pitchfork. "You want to scare me? You'll have to do better than that." Blake's bravado wavered, his bravado cracking under the weight of John's truth. Fear is a powerful motivator, but it can also breed hesitation. In that moment, they were neither predators nor prey. They were simply human, standing before another human, a standoff ignited by pride and the thirst for respect. Right then, a sudden rustling filled the air, a low growl emerging from the shadows. Max, John's loyal dog, dashed into view, muscles tense and ready. The gang had heard stories of the dog's fierce loyalty, and in that moment they felt the tides turning. "Back off!" John shouted, his voice strong and resolute. As the gang hesitated, Blake took a step back, glancing nervously at the pitchfork and Max, both symbols of a strength they hadn't anticipated. Their bravado slipped further, doubt precipitating an instinctual retreat. "This isn't over, old man," Blake finally spat, but the weight behind his words felt feeble, more a proclamation of uncertainty than of threat. The gang turned, sprinting away into the depths of the field, laughter replaced by panic. John stood in the moonlight, heart racing but pride surging through his veins. He had faced the metaphorical storm tonight and emerged unscathed. As the days languished into uneventful weeks, John continued his work on the farm. Though the iron wolves had backed down, their presence still lingered in the air like a bad smell that wouldn't dissipate. What they didn't know was that intimidation was no match for the strength of resilience born from years of hard work on the land. Every crack of thunder sent a tremor down his spine, and each gust of wind reminded John of that night. Though the apprehension hung like a storm cloud, he resolved to stand strong, determined not to let fear become the master of his choices. But soon the gang returned, emboldened by the quiet that followed their retreat. One evening, as John knelt down to sow seeds, he sensed their approach. The laughter echoed through the otherwise peaceful night, thickening the tension in his muscles. This time they came with more than just words. They brought chaos and destruction. Tires slashed, equipment damaged. Their intent was simple: fear. This was not just about intimidation. They intended to strike at the heart of John's livelihood. When John discovered the wreckage, a fire ignited within him. Anger and sadness washed over him like a torrent. Did they truly believe they could destroy all he worked for? The thoughts tore through him, but with each breath, he felt the resolve return. He wouldn't let fear dictate his actions. With a determination sharpened by years of facing adversity, John set out to repair the damage. Every twist of the wrench, every time his hands brushed against the earth, he felt a quiet strength building inside him. Each action reinforced not just the physical elements of the farm, but the very essence of who he was, a man defying the odds. As John fixed his tractor, he found a sense of clarity. Fear can paralyze or empower, and he vowed never to allow it to paralyze him. This was his land, his life, and he'd defend it with every ounce of strength he possessed. Yet, as the sun set, bringing an end to another long day of work, the iron wolves returned once more. This time they wore expressions that spoke of resolved determination tinted with a hint of fear. John's eyes narrowed as Blake stepped forward, flanked by a few of his gang members. "John," Blake began, voice low and serious. The tension crackled in the air, heavy and palpable. John stood tall, gripping his tools, ready to defend himself yet again. He asked, suspicious of their intent. "Look," Blake continued, his bravado slipping slightly. "We know we crossed a line. It was stupid." John regarded Blake closely, recognizing that beneath the bravado there was a hint of truth, an admission of vulnerability. It stirred something in him, a connection built on the shared weight of mortality and human nature. Strength isn't about tearing people down. "It's about building something lasting," John replied, his voice softening slightly. The earnestness in John's tone seemed to unearth lost emotions in Blake. The guarded person shifted, hesitation evident in his eyes. "I don't want to lose my life like this. I've made mistakes." John felt a flicker of hope. This was the moment where real change could begin. "Then start by truly changing, Blake." Blake nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of John's words. In an instant, he caught a glimpse of a better path, one that didn't require fear, intimidation, or destruction. He finally asked, vulnerability creeping into his suggestion. With a compassionate heart and a willingness to forgive, John took a step forward. "It will take time, but yes." The empowerment to rebuild became a catalyst, igniting a tentative willingness among the gang members. They began to show up, offering their hands to fix fences, mend equipment, and cultivate the land they once sought to tear apart. And slowly, as if the earth beneath them began to breathe again, the community transformed. John turned fear into connection, becoming a bridge for those willing to walk away from chaos. As the leaves turned colors and the harvest approached, laughter echoed through the fields, the sounds of cooperation, of men working side by side, long after the chaos had faded away. Blake became part of John's workforce, proving that change was not only possible but beautiful when embraced with courage. In the end, John became not just a farmer but a healer of sorts, a mentor to those once lost in darkness and chaos. His resilience shined bright, illuminating the paths of others, allowing them to find strength in vulnerability. The iron wolves, once feared, became part of the very fabric of the community they once sought to control. Through John, they learned that real power is rooted in kindness, connection, and the courage to forge ahead. And in the heart of Maplewood, among the golden fields, forgiveness blossomed where fear had once taken its hold. The story lived on as a testament to the strength of unity, a reminder that even in the face of chaos, hope emerges where resilience takes root. The sun dipped low behind the dusty horizon, casting sharp shadows across the fields of green and gold. In the heart of that sprawling farmland stood a lone figure, Ben Miller, a farmer who had spent his entire life tending to the land his ancestors had worked for generations. He was as much a part of it as the soil, every line on his face telling a story of sweat, persistence, and courage. But today, those stories would come to a head, as trouble brewed just beyond the fence line. A gang known as the Iron Beasts, a group of young men with a reputation for chaos and intimidation, had turned their attention toward Ben. They were accustomed to getting what they wanted through fear. They exerted control over those too frightened to stand against them, but Ben Miller was no ordinary man. As dusk settled, the gang gathered, their laughter hauntingly loud against the tranquil backdrop of the farm. Blake, the gang leader, leaned casually against a battered truck, a smirk painted across his face. "Look at the old man, still working like he's got nothing to worry about," he declared, nudging his friends who laughed in agreement, their bravado echoing through the fields. They approached the farmhouse, their reckless energy growing with each step. To them, Ben was simply a farmer, a dusty relic of an older time. They thought they could easily intimidate him, squeeze fear into his heart like an iron fist. Little did they know, Ben had stood against storms far greater than this. As Ben wiped his brow with a calloused hand, he caught sight of their silhouettes creeping up. A chill spilled through him, but he held his ground. "You boys don't belong here," he called, his voice steady like the towering oak trees that framed his land. Blake shot back, stepping boldly closer. "We've come to have a bit of fun, old-timer." Ben echoed, that familiar fury flaring inside him. "You call this fun?" Laughter erupted among the gang, but it was tinged with something uncertain. Maybe it was the way Ben stood, his frame unbroken despite the encroaching shadows. Maybe it was the piercing resolve in his eyes. There was no backing down in this man. Blake stepped in closer, puffing out his chest. "You're just an old man in a field. You think you can stand against me and my crew?" Ben took a deep breath, his heart racing but his voice unwavering. "You can be brave with a gang at your back, but courage means standing on your own." For a moment, the laughter died down. Blake squinted, searching for weakness in Ben's stone-like demeanor, but all he found was anger and resilience staring back. "You want fear? You'll have to dig deeper," Ben added, his words firm, holding the weight of every lesson taught to him by hard work, grit, and the land he loved. The gang paused, shifting uncomfortably. Fear is a strange companion. It can breed chaos or create hesitance. Ben felt the tension rising, but he remained unmoved, a rock against the tide of their bravado. Suddenly, one of the gang's members, a skinny kid with a nervous twitch, muttered, "Maybe we should just leave him alone." Blake shot him a fierce glance. "Shut up." But Ben seized the moment, drawing upon the power of that silence. "You think you're tough. You think standing together in a pack makes you stronger. Real strength lies in facing what you fear the most." As Ben finished speaking, an unexpected growl erupted from behind him. Charlie, his loyal German shepherd, came bounding around the corner, fur bristled and eyes fierce. The gang visibly flinched, and for the first time doubt bubbled to the surface. "Whoa," Blake hesitated, taking a step back. "Yes, and he doesn't like intruders," Ben said, his tone a mixture of warning and pride. A sense of vulnerability began to creep into Blake's bravado. "Good times come from respect, not threats," Ben replied. And with that he turned his back to them, confident in his role as protector of the land. The growling dog moved to stand beside him, an impenetrable barrier against the chaos threatening to invade his peace. The gang stood frozen for a moment, caught in the tension. For a fleeting moment, they realized they had stepped into a confrontation far greater than a simple scare tactic. Their identities were entangled in a web of fear they couldn't escape. Finally, Blake turned, frustration boiling over. "Fine, we're not done yet, old man." With that, he and the gang retreated, their laughter hollow, a reflection of the uncertainty that now filled their minds. Relief washed over Ben as the night fell again, enveloping his farm in a soothing darkness. But he knew this was far from over. Fear doesn't just evaporate. It lingers, watches, and waits for the next moment to pounce. Days turned into weeks, and though the iron beasts kept their distance, their shadows still loomed large. No one should take comfort in fear's retreat. Ben could sense their presence, feel the chaos brewing just beneath the surface of everyday life. As he tilled the fields and cared for his crops, he found it increasingly difficult to shake the feeling that they would return. And return they did under the cover of darkness, like specters rising from the shadows. One quiet night, as he locked up the barn, the gang descended once again. But this time it wasn't just laughter that greeted him, it was chaos. "Look at what we found," Blake taunted, wielding a spray can, the glow of the moon illuminating their mischievous grins. Ben's heart sank as he realized they were about to deface his property, his sanctuary. He shouted, stepping forward, hands balled into fists. The gang fanned out, sneering. One shouted, shaking a can filled with the scent of mischief. "Try it," Ben replied, steeling himself, ready to act. In that moment he felt a surge of adrenaline pulse through him, echoing the very roots of his being. They thought they could reduce him to nothing, but they underestimated the power of a man fighting for what mattered. But instead of charging headlong into chaos, Ben decided to take a different approach. "You think this makes you strong?" His voice rang out through the tension, steady and unwavering, pulling back the curtain on their facade. Blake shot back, his bravado faltering. Ben's words hung in the air, the truth casting a spotlight on their hollow bravado. As the gang paused, an eerie silence wrapped around them. It became more than a standoff. It became a moment of self-reflection where fear met reality. Blake looked around at his friends. Some squirmed as doubt filled the space. They weren't here just to have fun anymore. They were questioning their own motives. "Let's go," Blake finally muttered, trying to retain some semblance of control. Ben challenged. That was the crux of it, fear of the unknown. As darkness surrounded them, a flicker of light glowed within the eyes of the gang members. They may have thought of themselves as strong and fearsome, but Ben's unwavering call for truth had cut through their bravado. In that moment the gang turned and fled into the night, their laughter replaced by a rush of uncertainty. And even as Ben stood in the cold air, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end, but rather a turning point. As weeks progressed, news of the standoff spread through the small town. People began to rally around Ben. He became a symbol of resilience. He hosted community gatherings in the shadow of the conflict, drawing neighbors together, lifting spirits high above the intimidation that once held sway over them. The iron beasts were still in town, but their power waned against the growing support for Ben. They saw how the community cheered each other on, and it made them all the more uncertain. Fear, once their tool of choice, now turned against their own insecurities, leaving them little more than shadows on the fringes of their own lives. Then came a day that changed everything. In the middle of one of his gatherings, Blake approached Ben once more, this time with a slightly different expression, one of humility. He asked, the weight of disappointment heavy on his shoulders. Ben turned, surprise etched across his face. "About what we've done," Blake began, his voice shaky but earnest. "I don't want this life anymore, I think." Ben listened, allowing the sincerity to settle in. "It takes guts to admit when you're wrong," he replied, his tone calm. "But change doesn't happen overnight." Blake nodded, freshly aware of the implications of his actions. "I want to make it right. I want to help in the community." With a slow smile spreading across his face, Ben extended a hand. "Then let's get to work. You can start by joining us in the next community project." And just like that, an unexpected alliance began to form. Blake and a few of his former gang members started attending community meetings, picking up shovels and hoes alongside neighbors they once terrorized. Joe, the local mechanic, organized repairs, while others brought food to share. Bit by bit, the walls that had divided them crumbled, and the community's roots began to intertwine in new and powerful ways. Through key moments of reflection and confrontation, unity emerged, encapsulating the essence of what it meant to stand firm against intimidation. As months passed, the iron beasts transformed not overnight but step by step, shedding layers of bravado, learning the power of connection. Ben had turned a conflict into a catalyst for change, a lesson not just for the gang but the entire community. They learned that strength lies not in the withdrawal from fear, but in the choice to confront it head-on, wrapped in love and support for one another. In the end, as the sun set over the fields, coloring the world in vibrant hues, those old scars twisted into stories. The story of a farmer who stood tall, afraid but resolute, and ultimately united a community tired of living in fear. And as shadows fell over Maplewood that night, they knew together there would always be the strength to face whatever storm lay ahead. The sun hung low over the quiet town of Ridgewood, casting long shadows that danced along the edges of the fields. Dust swirled in the warm breeze, stirring memories of a simpler time. In the heart of these fields stood a lone farmhouse, a place that had seen generations of hard work, love, and sacrifice. This was where Sam Porter, a rugged farmer with hands hardened from years of plowing the earth, spent his days nurturing the land he cherished. But today was different. A storm was brewing, not the kind that came from the sky, but something more sinister. Just beyond the rows of corn, a gang known as the Steel Hawks lurked, their silhouettes dark against the fading light. They were notorious in the county kids turned bullies, fueled by their need for control and chaos. And they had set their sights squarely on Sam. As Sam finished his work and wiped the sweat from his brow, he sensed a tension in the air. It was that moment, that flicker in the atmosphere when instinct warns you to look over your shoulder. He turned to see the gang approaching, their footsteps heavy against the gravel path, laughter dancing on the brink of something threatening. "Look at that old man, still playing farmer in his little field," Blake, the gang's leader, called out, his voice dripping with mockery. The gang snickered, their confidence swelling like a balloon about to burst. They thrived on fear, relishing the power that came from intimidation, but Sam was not one to quiver easily. He lifted his chin, squared his shoulders, and met Blake's smug gaze. "Gentlemen," Sam said, his voice steady, firm, "you're not welcome on my land." The laughter from the gang faded, replaced by a taut silence that hung in the air. Sam could see the uncertainty flickering in their eyes, a crack forming in their bravado. "What?" one of them challenged, stepping closer, hands on his hips. Sam took a deep breath, drawing on the strength of all the generations who had come before him. No one fears a pack of boys trying to prove something they'll regret. Blake stepped forward, a smirk still painted across his face, but it faltered slightly. He barked, puffing his chest out. As if on cue, they moved closer, encircling Sam. The air grew thick with tension, the fading light casting long shadows that flicked like flames around them. Sam felt the adrenaline surge through his veins, but he stood his ground. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, raising his voice to cut through the worry. "You think terror is strength, but it only reveals your own weakness." A few gang members exchanged uneasy glances, but Blake sneered again, his face shifting from mockery to rage. As they moved, a low thrum of fear pulsed through Sam, but he pushed it deep down. He wouldn't let them see him shake. Just as they surged forward, the sound of barking filled the air. From around the barn rushed Max, Sam's loyal dog, a German shepherd whose loyalty ran deeper than the roots of the corn he guarded. Max positioned himself beside Sam, teeth bared and growl rumbling deep in his chest. The threat flickered like a flame as the gang halted, momentarily taken aback. Blake scoffed, though his bravado wavered. "Better than a gang," Sam shot back, his voice now dripping with a defiance that held ground. A moment passed and uncertainty washed over the gang. Maybe it was the fire in Sam's eyes or the strength of his words, but something shifted. Blake clenched his fists and glanced at his friends. "We'll be back," he growled, a hint of doubt creeping into his tone. With that, the gang retreated, their laughter fading into the night like ghosts slipping back into the shadows. Sam stood tall, heart pounding with adrenaline, yet fortified by an unwavering resolve. The confrontation had shifted something within him, igniting a fire he hadn't realized was still smoldering. Days drifted into uneasy weeks. The steel hawks had retreated for now, but Sam could feel their presence lurking in the corners of his mind. He poured himself into work, channeling his energy into the earth plowing, planting, harvesting. Yet the fear of what lurked in the shadows never fully dissipated. Then, one fateful evening, as a storm rolled in, dark clouds gathering ominously overhead, Sam heard the unmistakable sound of laughter echoing through the air. He looked up just in time to see the steel hawks descending upon his farm, their figures illuminated by occasional flashes of distant lightning. He muttered to himself, instincts kicking into high gear. As he stepped outside, he felt the tension crackle in the air, the winds whipping through his hair. Blake, now emboldened by the cover of thunder, stood at the forefront, his posture exuding a false bravado. "You thought you could scare us off. Regroup to what?" Sam shot back, eyes narrowed. A few gang members snickered, but the doubt flickered like a light bulb losing power, their bravado slipping under Sam's unwavering gaze. Blake shouted, waving a can of spray paint like it was a trophy. Just as he moved forward, Sam assessed the situation, feeling the ground swell beneath his feet and the power of the storm echoing his resolve. To counter their reckless energy, Sam stood tall, a lighthouse in the storm. "You think vandalism makes you strong. It doesn't matter how much paint you have. What matters is character." As if taken aback by the onslaught of honesty, the gang hesitated, their laughter faltering, the energy in the air shifting. If fear was a weapon, Sam's courage was a shield, pushing back against their intentions like a gust of wind stifling a flame. In that crucial moment, a bolt of lightning illuminated the scene, casting stark shadows across their faces, emphasizing the fear creeping beneath their facade. Blake faltered, glancing at his crew, and a flicker of distrust arose among them. "It's just paint," one of the gang members whispered, his voice trembling. "Shut up." Blake barked back, but his voice lacked the conviction he so desperately wanted to project. Sam seized that moment, stepping forward to bridge the gap. "You're afraid of becoming who you truly are. You hide behind a mask of bullying instead of knowing what real strength means." Cold rain began to fall, the drops splattering against the paving stones, creating rhythm against the escalating tension. Sam pressed on, his voice rising above the storm. Blake visibly shifted, his bravado trembling. The rain began to pour, soaking through their clothes, but Sam's words poured through even harder. But then something unexpected happened. One by one, the gang began to step back, their faces twisting with conflict. Blake glanced at the group surrounding him, at what they would become if they didn't change. The fear that they had lived on began to recede, replaced by an undeniable truth. "Let's just go," Blake finally muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The remnants of the gang turned, shuffling away into the night, shadows retreating against the backdrop of the storm. Sam stood alone, feeling the weight of the rain pouring down, a mix of relief and sorrow washing over him. But he knew they would return. This fight was far from over. As the clouds drifted away, a fragile peace settled over his farmhouse, but the battle lines were drawn now. Sam felt the tension begin to simmer below the surface, knowing the steel hawks would have to confront their demons. Days turned to weeks, and as autumn approached, the landscape was painted with vibrant hues. Yet beneath the shifting leaves, Sam sensed something brewing, a storm still to come. He had faced many battles in his life. He knew that fear does not easily let go. But he also felt a stirring of hope. His neighbors had begun to rally around him more than ever, a community growing closer in solidarity, standing firm against those who sought to spread chaos. He wasn't walking this path alone. One evening, as he was tending to his crops, he noticed the telltale silhouettes of the steel hawks lurking near the edge of his property. This time, though, they weren't laughing. As ominous clouds gathered once more, a different kind of tension filled the air, thick and charged. Blake stepped forward, his expression serious, devoid of the bravado that had characterized their previous encounters. "We need to talk," he stated, words tumbling from his mouth with a vulnerability that shook the very ground beneath them. Sam replied cautiously, gripping a hoe as he turned to face the boy-turned-man, his heart racing. I don't want to do this anymore. The fighting, the fear. It's all meaningless," Blake admitted, his voice raw. Sam asked, meeting his gaze. Blake took a deep breath, seeming to search for the right words. And just like that, in the looming darkness of the sky, the revelation struck. The potential for change hung suspended in the air like the first drops of rain hitting the parched earth. "Takes courage to admit you're scared," Sam responded, lowering his tool and taking a step forward. Then, in an abrupt turn of fate, the wind shifted. With a crash of thunder, the storm broke loose, pouring down rain faster than anyone could have anticipated. "Let's go inside," Blake shouted, glancing at the other members of the Steel Hawks. Confusion etched on their faces, but the weight of uncertainty still lingered. In that moment of chaos, everything seemed to hang in the balance. As lightning crackled across the sky, illuminating their faces, Sam felt the resolve strengthen within him. "Change doesn't happen under cover, it comes from stepping into the light," he shouted, his voice rising against the downpour. "Let's talk this through." The storm raged around them, each drop a reminder of the chaos within and the power of that moment hanging in the balance. Only time would tell who would walk away from this tempest, forever altered by the choices made beneath the stormy sky. As they faced each other, a challenging road lay ahead, a path illuminated by the possibility of change, where fear and courage would collide once more. But just then, the sound of a distant engine grew louder, pulling closer, and Sam's heart raced. What if the storm wasn't the only thing they had to face? He turned to look at Blake, who mirrored his concern, the clouds swirling ominously overhead. The stakes had just risen higher, and the resolve to not back down would not only be tested but perhaps shattered in the days to come. Would courage withstand the unveiling storm, or would fear once again reign supreme? As they stood on the cusp of uncertainty, everything changed.